Kel'el Ware is a unique player, perhaps unlike any that the Hoosiers have had, certainly in recent years and maybe ever. But still, he might be exactly the type of player the Hoosiers need to play the way Mike Woodson wants to play.
You are Locked On Hoosiers, your daily podcast on the Indiana Hoosiers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, everybody? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Hoosiers, your one and only daily one-stop shop for everything IU athletics. I'm your host, as always, Jacob. I want to thank you guys for making us your first listen or your first watch every single day. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit fanduel.com/locked on to get started. The big news, obviously, Kel'el Ware is in Bloomington. We talked kind of initial reaction to him becoming a Hoosier on Tuesday's episode. Let's dive a little bit deeper because, as I said during Tuesday's episode, there was too much news to do too deep of a dive into what this means for the Hoosiers. We have the time now. So I want to spend today's episode talking about why he's kind of the perfect fit for the Hoosiers offensively, and some pairings, some guys he's going to be playing, I think, a lot of time with, and how those matchups go. First, let's talk just kind of a general approach to the offense. We talked earlier in the transfer window, I guess we'll call this, earlier in the spring, that from everything we had heard, the Hoosiers want to play quicker, more up-tempo, more modern, is the word I continue to use. They had a very old-school approach to offense with Jackson Davis. They had to. It worked. But Mike Woodson wants to play a more modern offense. I spent a lot of time kind of talking about Chris Ledlum and why I thought he was really important to modernizing the offense. He still is, but that was before I knew Kel'el Ware was even on the table, because Kel'el Ware absolutely modernizes this offense just in the snap of a finger. IU can still go further. I mean, getting guys like Ledlum, Dalton Connect, just ball handlers and shooters and guys who can play on the perimeter, that will still modernize the offense. But Kel'el Ware immediately takes IU a big step in that direction. Just I'm sure a lot of you, as I have done, have looked up videos and articles and everything you can find about Ware, and just compare what you've seen and read about him to what Jackson Davis was. None of this is, I want to be certain to make sure, none of this is criticizing Jackson Davis. He's one of the best players to ever play at Indiana. But when looking at how most basketball is played and how kind of modern basketball is generally played, you need more spacing. You need more guys on the perimeter that can make plays, and there's a number of ways to do it. Maybe it's to have four guys around a big center. Maybe it's to have your center play around the perimeter and have a player like Malik Reneau who can play as your player in the post. But you need more versatility, and that's a word we're going to talk about a lot with Ware. He's a very versatile player. This is going to look like a much different offense than last year, a much more open offense. The last couple of years, for really as long as Archie was there, the offense did not look open. There were guys in the post, and there were not many shooters, not many driving lanes. Just by adding someone like Ware and putting him in a front court with Malik Reneau, who can space the floor a little bit as well, you're going to create driving lanes, and that's going to have a huge impact on IU's offense. Xavier Johnson, we're going to talk specifically about Ware and Xavier Johnson, but Xavier is someone that excels at getting to the rim. He's going to have lanes to do that now. They weren't always there when Jackson Davis was there. Even a guy like Trey Galloway, who can do it, he couldn't do it a lot, didn't do it a lot. That'll be a big positive change for him. next season. But those guys, I think, are going to find more success in just having those lanes to get to the rim, just having an offense that isn't so bogged down. And I think this offense is going to look drastically different to what last year's offense. I think IU will play faster, and that means a number of things. I think, for one, I know, and it's been written about, and you can watch it, Ware runs the floor very well. So I suspect IU is going to try to get out and transition more, try to turn offense into defense, try to turn missed buckets into transition opportunities, because Ware runs the floor well. He's a really, really good athlete, and IU needs to take advantage of that. It didn't make sense in the previous years to play an up-tempo style with Trace Jackson Davis and Race Thompson, two guys who were athletic for their position, but IU was at its best when it was slowing down and getting the ball into their hands in the half court. I think this year it makes a lot more sense to play up tempo, to play faster. That also could mean in the half court itself, not have an offense where you throw it into the post, force the defense to react, and then you play off that. That's what a lot of IU's offense look like. You force the defense to either double or not double, and then it was reacting to that, and possessions weren't quick. This time around, I think you could see a lot of early offense where IU pushes the ball in transition. Maybe they don't have a fast break opportunity, but then it flows into a pick and roll, and then you have a mismatch and a guy gets to the rim, things like that, where 5, 6, 7, 8 seconds go off the shot clock instead of 20, 25 seconds going off the shot clock. I just think in general, IU is going to look a lot faster offensively this season. I mean, we know that that's what Mike Woodson wants to do, is to play faster. And I mean, there's a reason that he sought after Ware to bring him in. He's a talented player, but he wasn't going after just any center available. A lot of schools were going after Ware. I mean, a lot of schools would have taken the number 2, number 1 prospect in the transfer portal, but there's a reason they were going really hard after a Kel'el Ware versus a Hunter Dickinson, who is in the portal, but there's been no links to IU. If IU really wanted to play the same style of offense that they did last season, they would have went hard after Hunter Dickinson. They didn't. They went hard after Kel'el Ware. And I think we're going to see a much more open offense this season. Now, what's that going to mean for specific pairings and matchups? We're going to talk about that. Let's start with talking about the front court, because I think maybe two of the only really nailed on starters right now are Kel'el Ware and Malik Reneau. And I think that can work. We talked about how playing 2 forwards probably wasn't the move going forward. I wasn't expecting one of them to be Kel'el Ware. So we'll talk about why I think that can work and what that pairing might look like offensively next season. Before we do that, let's talk about FanDuel, our sponsor of today's episode. Grand slams, no hitters, and double plays are back, and there's no better place to get in on the MLB action than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. That's because right now, new customers can step up to the plate and get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up, place your first bet, and get up to $1,000 back in bonus bets if you do not win. Don't miss your chance, guys. It's free money. There's no catch. There's no fine print. There's none of that. It is free money. Don't miss your chance to get that no sweat first bet up to $1,000 when you join FanDuel today. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball. As always, a shout out to you guys for making us your first listen, all the support you continue to give us. I can't tell you enough how much I appreciate it, especially on YouTube. We are rapidly growing over there, very quickly closing in on 1,000 subscribers. Join us. That's our goal right now, to get to 1,000 subscribers. It's a big milestone. So if you guys can, head on over there, subscribe. If you're watching us for the first time over there, subscribe. We're your one and only daily IU podcast. We're here, rain or snow or shine, sunshine or gloomy days, whatever it is, we're here for you guys. Let's talk some more about Ware in the front court. One thing I wanted to touch on, I forgot to during the last segment. You can kind of look at what he was last year with Oregon, and if you want to try to figure out what he might be for IU this upcoming season, some of it's projection. Last year we talk a lot about position and role on Evan Mia, the analytics or advanced stat site that we use. The role is just kind of described as what type of player you are. Xavier Johnson is a 1 because he's more of a creator, whereas someone like Malik Reneau is someone that graded out more as a receiver. He could create a little bit for himself in the post. A Race Thompson graded out as a 3.7 out of 5 in terms of being closer to a receiver. To that point, Kel'el Ware was a 3.4. So not someone that creates a ton for himself, but he can be on the receiving end and still be effective. Look, last year was kind of a weird year for him. So you can look at some of the advanced numbers and try to look at what type of impact he had. He graded out by their offensive Bayesian performance rating, which is just kind of their metric that they use as an advanced number to talk about their impact and what he brought to the team on the floor. He was a 1.5 last year. Not great, not awful, somewhere around Trey Galloway or Race Thompson levels of impact. Not that type of player, but just what they're bringing to the floor or bringing to that end of the court. Defensively is where he shined out, 1.25, which some of this is a little weird. Trace only graded out as a 1 on their defensive metric, though he was a 4.6 overall. You can also, they have the projections for next year, which I think might be better and also be more indicative of what he's going to be. He's projected as a 2 offensively, a 2.0, which would have been almost identical to Jalen Hood-Schifino. That feels closer to what he's going to be next year. Defensively, 2.01 is what he's projected out at. My word, that would be the best defender on IU last season. Again, I have obvious questions about this metric. Trayce Jackson-Davis was one of the best defensive players in the country, and he was like the 5th best defender on the team based on this metric. So I have a lot of questions. I don't think that side is very accurate, but overall, Ware grades out as a 4.01, which would be behind only Trace last year in terms of impact. So there's reason for optimism. Now, it's going to be interesting to see how he plays in this new look offense. And I talked a lot when we were kind of talking about IU needing to modernize, how they weren't going to play 2 big men together. They're going to play 2 big men together. Having said that, I would be very surprised if the opening night lineup does not have Malik Reneau and Kel'el Ware as your 2 front court players. Now, this is a lot different than what it was with Race Thompson and Trayce Jackson-Davis. Kel'el Ware can play on the perimeter. He did it a lot at the beginning of the year. I think they complement one another a lot more than IU's front court players did last year. Race was really good on the interior and kind of finding spaces and playing off Trace that way. But ultimately it was always pretty crowded. Same with Malik. He didn't have kind of that same synergy there. So things were obviously kind of a mess whenever Trace and Malik played together. Kel'el Ware is just going to open things up a lot more. And that's going to help out a lot. Ware spent a bunch of time on the perimeter early on at Oregon, and he's comfortable there. It's not like he was forced out there. Once his minutes kind of went down as the season went along, he played a lot more center. He was moved into the post a lot more. He also played a lot with centers last year. Malik Reneau is not a traditional center, and I think that helps in this instance. There were questions about whether he could be the center for the team next season. I thought he could be. he would be a little bit undersized. If you put somebody like Kel'el Ware around him, I think that helps out a lot. And I think that front court actually is really enticing and a thing that I'm really looking forward to see. Ware can space the floor out. Malik at times can space the floor out. I wouldn't be surprised if he spends a lot of time trying to work on a 3-point shot this summer. He did it a little bit. I don't even think he really ended up shooting that many. It was kind of early on that he did it, and once the season went along, that vanished entirely. He only shot 8 of them. They didn't look bad when he shot them, so I wouldn't be surprised if that's something they try to add, maybe just a corner 3-pointer or a top of the key 3-pointer. IU's going to run a lot of pick and pop with Kel'el Ware, and we're going to talk about that with Xavier Johnson in a bit, but that's going to be a type of play they're going to run. Having those opportunities with Malik as well, it could be interesting. And if you're going to run pick and roll with Ware and Xavier Johnson, the obvious place to put another big like Reneau is in the corner or in the dunker spot. But for the sake of this discussion, in the corner, Malik, if he can get a 3-pointer down like that, would be great. He can play in the dunker spot, I think, just as well. That's kind of the spot in the baseline in between the lane and the 3-point line, just kind of that middle area, that mid-range area is called the dunker spot. So these aren't guys that are kind of glued to the paint around the rim, and that's going to help out a lot. Having Ware around is going to help Malik have space to operate in the post. Kind of compare it to what we discussed with the women's team this year and how having a new approach to their offense meant Mackenzie Holmes was going to have more space to dominate, and dominate she did. I'm not saying Malik Reneau is going to be a first-team All-American like Mackenzie Holmes was, but I am saying that just giving a player with post moves like what Malik has space to operate is going to lead to good things as well. And that's more of kind of an indirect effect of having Kel'el Ware on the floor. In general, Ware's versatility, I think, is really going to help IU this season. He can play as the lone 5. If you get a Ledlum or a Caleb Banks, who they have, you can play a front court that is Banks and Ware and then basically 3 guards, whatever that ends up being, Xavier and Galloway and CJ Gunn or Ja'Kai Newton or Gabe Cups, if you want to play 2 of the point guards together. Whatever that ends up being, you can play that. That's a very modern offense. You can also play Ware alongside Reneau if you're coming up against a team that has multiple big men. You can play him against or alongside Sparks. I don't know how much we'll see that. You can do it, though. You can play him alongside someone like that. Just that versatility. He's going to have a lot of time on the floor this year, and he's going to play alongside a lot of guys, but he's comfortable doing that. And I think that's going to be the biggest positive he brings to this IU offense. IU didn't have a ton of positional versatility last year. Trace pretty much had to be the 5. Race pretty much had to be the 4. He played a little bit of 5 when they were playing no-name teams before the holidays. Miller Kopp kind of had to be the 3. He played a little bit of 4 when IU was behind in games and stuff. But I mean, like, IU just didn't have a ton of positional versatility. Kel'el Ware alone brings a lot of that, and he can play it with a lot of different lineups, and that's going to be a big positive. IU can create mismatch problems by having Ware out there on the floor, and that's going to be big for them. I think Mike Woodson's really going to take advantage of that next season. That's something that they do in the NBA, and obviously Woodson spent a lot of time in the NBA, so I wouldn't be surprised if that's an element he brings to IU's offense this year as well. We've hinted at it. We've discussed it a little bit. Let's talk about the dynamic between Kel'el Ware and Xavier Johnson, because I think it's going to be a really important one next season, obviously assuming Xavier is back. So we'll do that here in just a moment. When Xavier Johnson was at his best, I guess 2 seasons ago now, it was later in the year when they were running a lot of pick and roll, and he was making decisions out of that. And I thought he excelled a ton at that, whether it was getting to the rim, whether it was feeding the big man on the lob, whether it was kicking to someone. He was really good in pick and roll, and he was really, really important to IU making the tournament that season. We didn't see basically any of that, even when he was healthy. I think part of it was the players that IU had didn't really they weren't really a pick and roll team. Between Jalen Hood-Schifino and Race Thompson, you weren't going to have a lot of spacing in that lineup, and it just wasn't something IU did. IU is going to do a lot of pick and roll. I can tell you that now. Kel'el Ware excelled as a pick and roll player, as a roll man. Xavier Johnson excelled as the ball handler in the pick and roll. There's going to be a lot of that this season. There's going to be some pick and pop as well, which is a dynamic that hasn't existed for IU ever in pick and roll situations. There were people who could step out and hit jumpers, but a guy that can truly pick and pop to the 3-point line, I mean, that's rare. It's not something that exists much in college basketball in general, which is another dynamic that you can add to IU's offense. This is one specific example, but you can think out to Zach Edey, who is not fleet-footed. There's going to be a lot of pick and pop scenarios, especially if they're playing a drop coverage. If you come up against teams that play that drop coverage where they keep the big man in the paint and his goal is to keep the ball handler in front of him, you pick and pop in that, and Kel'el Ware has a wide open three, or it turns into him rotating the ball around and somebody gets a wide open three. That's how you beat those, or that's a way that you can beat those types of coverages. I think we're going to see a lot of that next season. And if we don't, Kel'el Ware is someone that is good in the role out of pick and roll situations, has really good hands. That's something that stuck out watching him. He catches anything around him. That's advantageous in pick and roll situations. And we've seen Xavier throw some pretty wild lobs. Kel'el Ware is 7 foot and has a huge wingspan. Those lobs are going to get really wild this season. But Kel'el Ware has caught a lot of them, as you see on tape. I just think this is something. I mean, and if IU wants to model itself after a more modern offense, I keep referencing the that Miami team because I mean, that's also the last example we have of a game that we watched, but there was a lot of pick and roll in that as well. And that's just what Indiana needs to do. It won't just be Xavier and Ware. It'll be Galloway and Ware. It'll be all sorts of guys. If Dalton Connect comes, which is a big if, we talked the latest update on him on Tuesday. But if they get a ball handling wing, there'll be pick and roll situations with that. I just think that's going to be something that's a lot more prominent in IU's offense this year. Ware can also space the floor on pick and rolls as well. We didn't see Malik Reneau in a ton of pick and roll situations. It was almost always Trace, but Malik, Peyton Sparks, both are guys. You can put them in the pick and roll. You can put Ware in the corner as the guy spacing, and he already has shown an ability to knock down threes. That's going to be one of the biggest things he's going to have to work on this summer, is becoming a consistent 3-point shooter. If he does that, the shot looks good. I always use the barometer of how they shoot at the free throw line as to whether that means they can be a good 3-pointer. It's not a 1-for-1 like it always happens, but if you have good form and are a good free throw shooter, typically you can turn that into being a good 3-point shooter. Ware shot 71% on 66 attempts at the free throw line last year. So he's a good free throw shooter. It was a little rocky at his 3-pointer throughout the year, but I have confidence he can improve upon that. It's going to be something that I'm sure he's going to hear from scouts and whatnot to improve as a 3-point shooter. So it's something he's going to work on. And if he can do that, then that's a big step for Indiana. But he can be that guy that spaces out. You can have Reneau as a roll man. You can have Sparks as a roll man. there's a lot of ways. As I said, that versatility that Ware brings is going to show itself in a lot of ways offensively, and it's going to really open up things for IU. So I'm really excited about what he's going to bring to the table. This really changes kind of the way IU is going to play next season. We'll see if it's for the better, and if he's able to unlock that potential, there's reasons to be optimistic. Just look at the last 2 years under Mike Woodson and what guys have been able to do just to improve over those last 2 years. If you're committed to it, Mike Woodson is going to get the best out of you. And Ware chose to be here, and if he's committed to it, I'm really excited about what the future could hold, because it could be a bright one for the Hoosiers. Thanks again, guys, for making Locked On Hoosiers your first listen every day. We'll be back with you perhaps later this week with Locked On Ducks, the Oregon podcast, to talk about Kel'el Ware. He watched Ware firsthand, get a look at the good and really the bad, how things might go awry with Ware next season. We're also going to start our season recaps for both the men's and women's team and any other transfer news. We always have you covered here. So be sure to follow us on Twitter, subscribe to the podcast, leave a quick rating and review, all of that great stuff. As always, guys, appreciate all the support you continue to give us. Most importantly, LEO.